At this point, you may have heard that China is now implementing new laws around games that are developed and published within China. And it's been making a lot of the rounds, with people in particular talking about a lot of the spending changes that are taking place. But there's actually more to it than I think people realize that's also going to impact the gaming experience for a lot of people beyond just spending. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the new content restrictions along with the new spending restrictions and how I think that's going to impact the gacha and gaming market as a whole. Let's jump in and take a look. Ultimately, the focus is supposed to be on protecting the rights of users and guarantee the mental and physical health of minors. As we know, China's really been trying to make a big push into the health of minors aspect with when they implemented a lot of the gameplay restrictions on people who are under the age of 18, for example. One thing I just thought was kind of a funny little addition here is they do have in Article 3 the cardinal principles insisting on prioritizing the protection of minors, promoting the core ideology of socialism, better satisfying the needs of people's well-being. I just think it's a completely different world, but that addition I think just says so much about the difference of cultures here. A one-to-one comparison would be if the US passed a law saying that any new games that were going to be developed and published in the US needed to promote the core ideology of capitalism, let's say, which when you put it in that context just sounds hilarious, trying to force that into something when we're talking about fundamentally art, which what a lot of games are. Yes, they've been commercialized, but broadly speaking, games are artistic expression in my world. So I thought that was funny. So jumping into the parts that I think are going to be more interesting for people is in Chapter 3 with the online game publication procedures. In this, we get into Article 16, which outlines a few different things that need to be considered when creating a game. Article 16 is strictly prohibited content, at least in how this translation frames it. Again, we're going to take all this with a grain of salt. It is an unofficial translation, let's say, but it's what we have to go off of. Horror, cruelty, and others that may affect the mental and physical health of minors. That, for example, is going to completely remove almost the entire horror genre of games from ever being published in China. Am I out to lunch here? Am I late to the party? Is that already kind of a thing? But that is another huge impact that goes beyond just gacha games. That's just games in general. That's a whole genre of games that have now been identified as well, this is probably a problem and you probably can't do this. You would never get something like Outlast, would never be able to be published under these restrictions here. That's horror, cruelty, and may affect the mental health, physical health of minors. Yes. Have you played that game? It's terrifying. Or grotesque at the very least. On number 7 here is, could this impact fan service even more? Having censoring of fan service in games has already been a touchy subject for people in the gacha community, but some of them are still pretty obscene in terms of the content that's offered. Could this be even harsher restrictions being implemented there? I think that could be the case. So we'll see what happens. The term pornography is used here, but that is also a localized term that I don't know if it's a one-to-one on the CN side. I don't understand Chinese, so I couldn't say for certain. But that's a lot of artistic definitions there that have been laid out that I think are going to be a huge thing to take into consideration here. So that's more the artistic expression sides of it that I just thought was really interesting and nobody was saying. But I do want to talk about some of the other restrictions too. So in online games, business is not allowed to add forceful PvP, meaning you cannot have a PvP mandatory based game. I think personally, while that's going to ruin maybe some of the vision for games, I think that's going to be totally able to be worked around. In my mind, if you have a game that when you are creating your character and you're logging into a server, you could choose to have a PvP server or a non-PvP server. So when somebody's going in for the first time, they can elect which one they want to be a part of. I think you could totally argue that that's not forcing PvP by choosing to play a game on a server that has PvP enabled. Most true PvP, like MMOs, for example, don't even have 100% forced PvP. It's certain areas or regions of the game where that can occur. That can totally be combated by having the ability to opt into that, or just by having servers that you go into where it's all the same mechanics, but it's a PvP server. So I don't know. Seems like an attempt at a restriction that I think wouldn't actually impact much, but that's just my thoughts on that. Now, one objection you guys might be having so far is, well, look, Connor, this is just Chinese legislation that's only going to impact the games that are actually being published and played in China. Well, yeah, kind of. I have a hard time believing that a developer is going to create two different versions of their game in terms of overall game structure or artistic expression, to have one for one version in China and one for one version globally, where there might be some more leniency with that. So while yes, this would only ever be enforced in China, I think it will impact the global audiences regardless. Limiting overplaying and large amount of top-up. Online games are not allowed to set login bonus, first time top-up bonuses, continuous top-up rewards, or other spending incentive rewards. Now, personally, I think this part's a W. Rare, very rare, China W on this one. I know there's probably some of you that are like, Connor, are you serious? Are you absolutely kidding me? I'm somebody who likes to play and enjoy gacha games. However, I'm not blind to the fact that many of the practices that are still using them are predatory. There's a lot of urgency that's put on certain packs that you only have 5 minutes to buy this pack, or well, you spend for the first time and you get this additional bonus that's giving you the added incentives to just really try and get your credit card from you. And I understand to some degree that's the model, and that's what you got to do on a free-to-play game. They're finding alternative ways to do monetization by giving you the base game for free. But that doesn't change the fact that many of these methods are still predatory and are actively targeting parts of the reward center of your brain, or the urgency centers of your brain, that are going to biologically pressure you into making an action. Now, I can already hear the people opposing this and arguing, saying, well, you're an adult, you get to make an adult decision. You could still choose to go to a casino and go gambling, and you could do that. You can always say no, you can always do that. Yeah, of course. But also, if we're understanding this in context, we're talking about games that are available to minors. We're not even talking about full-fledged adults making adult decisions here and choosing to go gambling. We're talking about games that are explicitly created for kids to play, like in the case of Genshin Impact, the biggest one and most obvious one, but even things like Punishing Gray Raven or Honkai Star Rail or Arknights, whatever the game may be, they're still catered to not just adults, they're catered to kids as well. And when you're doing that, and that's your demographic, you still have to cater to the lowest common denominator, which in this case is minors. So when we're talking about implementing these predatory practices that are going to exploit that developing part of their brain, yeah, I think that's a win. I'm team protect the kids here, okay? We're not even talking about, Twitch and some other policy stuff. We're talking about video games here. Video games for kids, or at the very least, preteens and teens. So yes, while you, the 20-something or 30-something or 40, whatever, you adult person yourself, and you can choose to make that decision, and you think everybody has the right to make their own decision, 100%. But we have other legislation and restrictions in for kids as well on so many other things. And sorry, I'm not a pure anarchist that I think we should remove all restrictions on everything. That's just me. But feel free to disagree with me in the comments down below. Come and yell at me in the comments down below, actually, because you know why? You know why you should do it? Engagement. It's gonna look exciting. We get a lot of people in there. So you know what? Yell at me in the comments. I don't care. I care a little bit. This one is kind of like a pro and a con. For beta testing, you're only allowed up to 20,000 participants, and their data needs to be deleted once the testing phase is over. Actually, it's like a half W. Like, I don't like the idea of artificially limiting beta testing to 20,000 people, because that's just gonna make it harder for me to get in on testing, to be honest, which just sucks. But I do like the idea of you have to delete the information and stuff after. That's a privacy win. Surprising coming out of China. But let's talk about some of the meat, some of the big things that people have been talking about. Gotching, Article 27. When businesses provide gotcha services, they should give a reasonable setting for amount of pulls and chances of pulling to prevent inducing reckless spending. At the same time, consumers should be provided with other methods of obtaining the gotcha item or items with similar performance through other ways, such as digital item exchange or buying for the item. Now, What does this mean? Seems like a lot of legal jargon. It seems by naming it specifically, gacha games are protected to some degree and aren't constituted as pure gambling as it's identified previously. Otherwise, it would just be prohibited content. But it does outline that gacha rates basically need to be reasonable. So hopefully that means we're going to be seeing an increase in the percentage rates of characters and drop rates. But we don't know what that increase could be because they don't actually outline specifically what reasonable is. And whenever you don't, the companies are going to try and push it to its absolute limit. But also at the same time, they need to be provided with other methods of obtaining the gacha item or items. Meaning that if you have a gacha mechanic in your game, there needs to be a method of buying the item directly as an alternative to doing the gacha. Which, again, as a gacha player, that's a dub. I love the idea that basically you can skip that, you can remove the gambling component to it, and you can buy the character outright. Now, this is where we're going to slow everybody's roll for a minute here. Does that mean that you're going to be able to walk in and buy a Genshin character for $20 or buy a new PGR character for $10, $15? No, not even close. Like I said, a lot of these things are not specifically identified in terms of the rates and the prices that you need to put into place for those characters. It's up to interpretation for the company to find what they think are reasonable rates. So that doesn't mean all of a sudden you're now going to be able to just go in and buy every new character for super cheap. I don't think that's going to be the case. However, that does mean I think you are going to have an opportunity to buy the characters. But here's how I see it going. If we take Punishing Gray Raven as an example, there's a way to calculate the dollar value for a single pull. This isn't the exact, but for the sake of example, let's say one pull in Punishing Gray Raven is equivalent to $1. To flesh that out then, to get a new character from the gacha guaranteed would cost you $60, not counting any kind of in-game farmed currency. If there's supposed to be a reasonable alternative, I see this implementing as you can do a hard pity, which is $60 if you hit a hard pity, or you can buy the character directly for $50 or $55, meaning it's just going to be marginally cheaper than hard pity. So there's still the incentive to use the gacha itself. You could get the character way sooner and save a bunch of money by still pulling for them on the gacha, or you can then buy them outright, which is slightly cheaper than hard pity, but now you're removing any uncertainty to the equation. That's personally how I see this manifesting in a lot of the gacha games that we have today. So I don't think anybody who's got some hopium out there who's thinking that they're going to be able to walk in and buy any new characters for real cheap and not worry about the gacha mechanics, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think coming in here, all of these companies are going to be finding the minimal possible requirement to meet that and still keep the mechanics that they have, because at the end of the day, these are the mechanics that are massive money makers for these companies. So they have huge incentive for trying to keep them as much as they can. I will say though, again, in terms of principle, my own opinion, I still think that's a big W. Enforcing companies to have an alternative to buy something directly that you don't have to use the gacha as the only method for doing that, that's a W. That is actually a step in the right direction in my opinion. Again, rare China W. Now, what I think will prevent the companies, however, from setting prices from being absurdly high on the purchasable alternative. In our hypothetical example there with Punishing Gray Raven, you know, they are not going to make the character be $60 directly or something absurdly higher than that in the case of like Genshin Impact, where we're talking about, you know, double, like 160 pulls to hard pity something. I don't see them walking in and making the character being sold for $180 outright to buy them. So meaning a double hard pity to get that. I think it's going to be set to something lower. And I also think that will be the case because in Article 39, there is also time frame and spending limits that are being implemented that's going to prevent players from spending too much money on a game in a short period of time. The rest of the bill is mostly just legal jargon at this point, but I hope I could shed a little more light for you on what this bill is supposed to be and how there are actually more content restrictions that are coming into play along with some of the spending restrictions that are potentially going to impact the games overall. But let me know what you guys think about the new legislation in the comments down below. I know I was a pretty big advocate for some of the things and some of the protections, but I'm definitely not an advocate for all of them because, again, I do think a lot of games are still art at the end of the day and should be open to more artistic freedom in terms of the content that they want to contain in them. Let me know what you think. I'm interested in your thoughts down below. If you made it this far in the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe on the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.